This time on Colchcraft, we're going to prove the internet wrong and show you how you can shred tires like this with your Coyote swap for around $5,000. Let's go. So I have this video broken down by cost from least to greatest. So the biggest purchases all the way down to the little nitpicky stuff at the very end. So with that said, let's get started with the engine. Now, my good friend clued me in on Copart. Copart is an insurance auction and they sell wrecked vehicles. And you do not have to have a salvage license to buy these things. Anybody can buy these salvage title vehicles. So after a lot of time searching, I finally found a truck that had rolled over and was in pretty bad shape, to be honest. And I ended up winning the auction for about $3,000. I think it was $3,060 delivered to my door or something like that. So you can buy trucks in better condition, but they're going to cost a lot more money. But the trade-off there is you can park those trucks out and make your money back. Unfortunately for me, my truck was in such bad condition, all I could sell off of it were the seats. And I'll get to that towards the end of the video where I recoup some cost. But like I said, the $3,000 basically just got me the tin can that I had to pry the engine transmission out of. I preferred buying the whole truck because I knew that way that I was at least getting all of the parts that I needed. I could pull off the entire wiring harness knowing that I got everything that I could get, and that if I was buying something off a marketplace, I wasn't sure that I was getting everything that I needed. So you can do it both ways. You could probably get a pullout off of marketplace for a little bit cheaper if you wanted to, but the risk is not knowing the condition and also not knowing if you're getting all the parts. Is that a big deal? I don't think so if you know what you're looking for, but I didn't, so I just opted to buy the whole truck. Now that brings us to the second most expensive part of this whole thing, and that was the wiring harness. I chose to use the factory wiring harness and fuse box and PCM and have them sent off to a guy in Tennessee who does modifications to allow the factory wiring harness to go standalone. You can spend a lot of money on the Holley setup or aftermarket stuff. I chose not to do that. I had seen and heard from many people that have used Lethal Nate Performance in Tennessee to do their wiring harness mods, and nobody had anything bad to say about it, and it was only $800. Now, it took a while. He's very busy. He does a side job, but the quality of work I got back was like, I can't even explain to you how neat and tidy it was. So what he did was I sent him the entire harness in a box, including the fuse panel, the PCM, like everything. He takes all the looming off, strips out all the circuits you don't need. He takes everything out of the fuse box, and as far as the PCM is concerned, he disables the PATs. So when you get the package back in the mail, you just plug in whatever's left that he has on the harness, you hook up power to it, turn the key, and it basically fires up. It is really that simple. The problem there is you don't have the interface with the Holley, and you have to have it tuned by someone. But again, that's not that big of a deal. So as I said, the wiring harness mod was $800, so that puts us at $3,800 total at this point. And I mentioned the tune, and I'll just say that was the third most expensive part of this whole process. That was $650, and there's a few reasons why I had to have it tuned. And I chose to use the factory 1356 transfer case out of the Bronco that I swapped this into. You can get around that. If you're using a two-wheel drive setup, then this doesn't really affect the two-wheel drive people as much. There's a speed sensor inside the transfer case on the F-150 that I did not use since I chose to keep the Bronco transfer case. So the tuner had to go into the PCM and turn something off so that it was not looking for the speed sensor because it was causing the transmission to shift funny. So that cost a little bit more money, but I think it's safe to say the base tuning itself cost $650. So that puts me right around $4,400 total at this point. All right, and as I mentioned, the transfer case. Well, being that this is a four-wheel drive vehicle I swapped into, I had two options. I could have kept the F-150 transfer case, or I could have used the Bronco transfer case. And I wanted to keep the factory dash looking factory, so I opted to keep the factory 1356 push button four-wheel drive. I had to buy an adapter to mate the 1356 transfer case to the transmission. That was about $480. Now, I could have used the factory F-150 transfer case, but I would have had to have bought a controller for that transfer case that cost around $800. So I saved about $300 and I still have all of the factory dash. So that was the way I wanted to go. But just know that if you're going for a four-wheel drive vehicle, you have both options. You can use the F-150 and buy the controller for it, or you can use the Bronco F1 OBS transfer case and buy the adapter. And when I say an adapter, it's just a cast aluminum piece from a company called Advanced Adapters, and it all bolts and slides together. There's no further mods. It is super easy. All right, so with the purchase of our four-wheel drive adapter, that brings us to $4,930. Next, we had to do some fuel system mods. So the fuel system in these Coyotes is what's called a deadhead. So it's not like a return style fuel system. However, the Bronco, the OBS, whatever, what have you, is a return style. So I had to basically build a small simple fuel system to make all of this work. So I had to purchase a 240 liter per hour fuel pump. I bought some fittings, I bought some line, and I bought an EFI fuel pressure regulator off of Summit's website. So all told, I have $439 in the fuel system. Very straightforward, nothing complicated to it. It uses the factory fuel rails and injectors on the Coyote, and they have adapters that will plug the fuel line directly to that fuel rail, and it's all very, very straightforward. I would say the fuel system might take you a couple of hours to do, and that's assuming you have to drop the tank. I was able to sneak my hand up over the tank and do everything that way. So pretty simple there. So with our fuel system, that gets us to $5,369. That brings us to steering. Oh man, I'm still kind of chapped on this one. It's been kind of a struggle, and a lot of that is self-induced. So the Coyotes have what's called electronic power assist steering. So there is no power steering pump at all, and there's not really an easy way to adapt it to the the swap without spending a pile of money. A kit from a company called KRC is out there. It's about $800, and it uses a GM style power steering pump on some special mounts to mount to the front of the engine. I want to say Power by the Hour has some stuff as well. It's about the same price. So you're going to spend around $800 or $900 on getting power steering into your truck if that's the way you want to go. I chose to go a different route with a Volvo power steering pump, and it is a standalone unit, and it works okay. There's two issues with it that I've found, and I'm actually still kind of fighting. So the first issue is there's a couple of style pumps. There's one that has an integral reservoir, and there's one that has a remote reservoir. I have the integral one, and it is very tall. It's probably close to 14 to 16 inches tall, and it's really difficult to find a spot for it to fit under your hood. Mine fits, but only just barely. You can tell that the top of the reservoir cap is rubbing on the underside of the hood. Not that big of a deal. The other thing is the pump requires a controller so that it doesn't run in limp mode. So I've not purchased that controller yet. It's like $53. It's not a lot of money. So while yes, the power steering pump currently works, you're not able to make quick adjustments because the pump isn't spinning fast enough to keep up with it. So it's actually a little bit dangerous, and it's probably something I need to purchase pretty quick because I've been driving the truck a lot lately. But I digress. So I've got about $250 in the steering. I was able to buy the pump for $100 used on Marketplace, and then I had another $150 in lines and fittings to adapt everything. A quick note on that is you cannot use regular AN lines. The pressure is too much. And believe it or not, I tried that. It exploded after everyone told me not to do it anyways. And so I had to end up buying the actual, I can't remember the, I'll think of it and put it in the comments, but there's a specific type of steel braided line you have to use for these high pressure systems. And anyways, all of that line and fitting cost me about $150. That brings us to drive shafts. And I actually don't have this in perfect order. So the drive shafts, I have $350 into. Now, if you are doing a two-wheel drive setup, it's going to be less because you have one less drive shaft to modify. But I will say that the Coyote swap, the transmission is shorter than the E4OD, so I had to lengthen the rear drive shaft by 3 inches and shorten the front drive shaft by 3 inches. So all of that cost me $350, bringing our total so far to $5,969. So that's really the last big expenditure I had. Everything from here on out, I'm going to run through pretty quickly, and it's nothing big, but it's cost. So we'll do that real quick. So the accelerator pedal, there people, and again, based on what the internet tells you, there's different ways to do it. I chose to buy a mount off of Facebook that I saw a guy make that's pretty cool. It's a piece of molded sheet metal that bolts to the firewall and then also bolts to the pedal. I was told that the truck pedal that I had wouldn't fit, so I didn't research it too far. I just threw it away and bought the adapter, and then I bought a new gas pedal off of LMR for like $130. So all told, for the accelerator pedal, I'm in for $210. I would say it's worth looking into this to see if you can use the factory truck pedal, because that's $210 you don't have to spend. Next is exhaust. I chose to keep the factory manifolds and just basically built an entire system off of the manifolds back. So I bought a builder kit off of Amazon. I bought a prefabricated X for the X pipe, and I bought 2 mufflers. All told, the exhaust cost me $279. I think I'm missing a couple mounts in there, so maybe I'm off by 20 bucks or so, but $280 for exhaust, which is stainless, I might add, is not terrible. A cold air intake, also off Amazon, $127. Radiator hoses. Now, that was something that I dug and I dug and I dug online. I could not find a lot of information, but I found that factory 11 to 14 Mustang GT hoses worked for my OBS radiator. The one caveat for that is on the upper radiator hose connection where it mounts to the radiator, I had to get creative, and I ended up heating the end of the hose up and greasing everything, and it was a very, very tight fit, but I was able to squeeze the hose over the outlet for the inlet for the radiator. So the 2 hoses, upper and lower, and then also coming off the engine, there's this weird T fitting thing. I was told to replace by a buddy because he says they leak really bad all the time. So those 3 pieces were $170. Vacuum lines, I just bought a universal kit off of Amazon for 30 bucks, but you'll have to run all new vacuum lines off of the motor to all of your accessories, like your brake booster, your air conditioning vacuum supply, $30 for stuff there. So all in, I'm sitting at $6,875. And so you're thinking, well, hey, dude, you said you're at $5,000. Well, I haven't got to the credits yet. So my truck, I mentioned, I was able to scrap. Sorry, the scrap value of the truck once I was done pulling everything out of it was $270. And I also mentioned I was able to sell the seats out of the truck for $600. The truck was a platinum trim, so the seats were worth a pretty good amount of money. Everything else inside the truck was junk. The truck was in a really bad rollover accident, so there was no body panels I could part out. All the lights were busted out. The interior was trashed. Apparently, the rear ends in those vehicles are worth a pretty good amount of money, but again, all the axles were snapped, and there was nothing useful. So all I could sell out of it was the seats. But the final thing I was able to sell was the 351 and E4OD out of my Bronco, and I got $700 for that on Marketplace. So that brings our total back down to $5,305 as you see it sitting today. Now, there's also a couple parts that I already had. I had an electric fan, and I had a transcooler sitting on the shelf from previous builds. So I was able to buy those. The fan I do not have on a controller. I just have it hooked up through a relay. When you turn the key on, the fan comes on. There is no controller that adjusts based on the temperature of the motor. It is on. I've gotten burned on those controllers before and don't prefer to use those. So $5,300. Now there's two things I mentioned that I have not done yet. And the first one is a harness for the dash. So the speedometer works, the fuel gauge works, and what else works? I don't remember. Anyways, uh, what does not work currently is the tachometer, the oil pressure, and the water temp gauges. Now, the guy that did my harness mods has a OBS harness that connects to the factory Bronco harness under the hood and will allow those gauges to work. It's $250. I have not bought that yet. It's on my to-do list. The other thing I have not completed yet, excuse me, is the AC. Being in Southeast Texas, the air conditioning is absolutely mandatory, but fortunately it's wintertime right now, so I haven't needed it as much. But the air conditioning, I am estimating I can complete for about $500. There's a couple of things to note, though, on air conditioning. The later models, I want to say Gen 3 and up, have what's called a variable displacement air conditioning pump, and you can't really use those compressors on the Coyote swaps because they're controlled by the PCM and it just doesn't work. So the Gen 1 and the Gen 2, like I have just a regular AC compressor. You can get those to work just fine. Or you can buy an aftermarket Sandin unit. I don't have a part number. I haven't looked into it yet. But I did look on Marketplace the other day, and they're floating around on Marketplace for about 150 bucks. And then finally, you will need to adapt all of the lines under the hood. And I, again, haven't looked in on that. So I'm just going to estimate right now that the air conditioning is going to cost me another $500 to get that going. So assuming that is all true, my all-in cost once I buy the harness and get the AC working will be at $6,055. So all told, we are well under $10,000, and especially well under the $20,000 the internet experts will tell you about. But let's talk about the benefits I've gotten from the Coyote swap. Well, I'll start with power. I have effectively doubled the output of the Bronco, and this truck absolutely screams. When you give it all the beans, it is going, and you had better be holding on because there is no stopping it until you pull up your foot. It has surprised me a few times, but more often than not, it has surprised other people in that Broncos of that age aren't supposed to go that fast. So that's been fun. But the other added benefit is fuel economy. I estimate on a road trip I took up to Dallas a while back, I got 16 miles per gallon driving at roughly 85 miles an hour average with several wide open throttle passes. So I haven't really taken on any other road trips and been nice to it, so I can't tell you what the all-in fuel mileage would be, but I would assume the aggregate would be somewhere north of 18 and less than 20. So all in all, not horrible. The drivability of the truck is amazing. I hop in it every morning and drive it 40 minutes to commute to my day job, and I have absolutely no complaints about anything. So if you're on the fence about it, there are very few drawbacks, and I think for a relatively small amount of money, you can have one of these of your own. Do I think you could do it any cheaper than $5,000? I think if you were to run across a really good deal on a Gen 1 pullout for 1,500 bucks with its two-wheel drive, you could probably be under $5,000. Are there any other places you could save money? Well, if you are a tuner or know your way around tuning, you could probably save your $650 there. If you're doing two-wheel drive, you can save yourself $500 with the adapter. Outside of that, again, two-wheel drive, you could have your drive shaft shortened for cheaper. So I think you could do a two-wheel drive swap for probably $3,500 if you really, really played your cards right and paid close attention to what you were doing. Well, if you're still paying attention, I really appreciate it. And if you don't mind, hit a thumbs up for me. It's free for you. It helps out the channel. But I also want to add that if you have any other questions that I didn't cover, or if you get into it, please feel free to come back to any of my videos and drop a comment. I will help out if I can. And I will post links to parts. I will post links to the full build videos if you haven't seen those yet. And once again, thank you for your attention. We'll see you on the next one.